Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Australian Property Investment Podcast, all about helping you make better property choices. I'm Aaron Christie David, mortgage broker and founder of Atelier Wealth, specialising in helping property investors. Join us each week as we speak to leading experts. These are real thought leaders in their industry, in their field, to ask them the three most common questions that we get asked by property investors. I'd love to introduce you today to Susan Farquhar, who is the founder of Cala Property. G'day, Susan. How you doing?
Good, thanks, Aaron. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for coming on, Susan. And we're going to go through your journey a little bit. Before we always start, we say that our show and what we talk about is general in nature and does not constitute financial advice. If you do want to speak to someone about your finances, feel free to reach out to myself and the team. Our details are hello@atelierwealth.com.au. And Susan will also include your details and all the links to Cala Property in the show notes as well. So if you want to have a chat to Susan, feel free to reach out. Susan, you have an impressive list of accolades, and I won't make you blush, but I will go through a couple of them as well. One is, your top 10 investment property experts in Australia, which is fantastic, and recently nominated for the Telstra Business Women's Award and New South Wales Woman of the Year. So a huge congratulations.
Thanks, Aaron.
Well done. It's impressive, and obviously it speaks volumes about kind of the ethos that you bring to an industry that very similar to ours, maybe has low barriers to entry. There's a lot of people that come in maybe to, I won't say make a quick buck, but maybe self-serving, if that's a fair assessment, kind of both our industries really.
Yeah.
So I think for you to stand out, that's something you should be incredibly proud of. Well done.
Thank you, Aaron.
Hey, Susan, I want to get straight into it, and why don't you share a little bit about us, about your journey, one as an investor and two as a business owner, if that's all right?
Sure. Well, they're kind of the same story, actually. So Cala Property was born out of me trying to work out what it meant to find the right property in the right place at the right time. And the reason I was driven to do so is because I invested in the wrong property in the wrong place at the wrong time, not once, not twice, but 5 times over.
Oh, yeah.
So by the time I was 26, I had 5 properties, and I honestly didn't even think that there were questions you needed to ask. I just believed this idea, the Australian idea that we have, that you always make money in property.
Yeah.
So I was living in the Blue Mountains, where I built a house there, and then I invested in other houses and blocks of land in the Blue Mountains as well. And then I had 3 major life-changing events in 3 years, and realised that I had to do something. I had to get rid of some debt. I needed some cash. And so I started looking at the properties. Yeah. And I really didn't have much option but to sell them rather than refinance, because I hadn't had any growth. In fact, 2 of them were in negative equity.
Wow.
Because what that means to your listeners is you've basically bought at the peak of the market, and then you've reevaluated it when the market's dropped, and the property's worth less than what you bought it for. I didn't even know that could happen, right? I was 26 years old. I'd never learned. I'd never learned anything about finance. So my first degree was in research, ironically, in international relations. But I didn't know that there was stuff you could research with property, so I just didn't, right? So anyway, when I got back on my feet, I had got some money together. I thought, okay, I know that property is the right asset class for me because I'm quite conservative, I'm quite risk averse, and the thought of investing in a company where they could potentially go bust or take all my money, didn't sit very well with me. So even though I had about $100,000 and could probably diversify the risk somewhat, I still wasn't all that comfortable investing in shares. So, and also I just sort of looked at the capital growth and the return of property once I started getting my head around what actually meant to be a property investor, and thought, no, property is the right thing for me. It's the right asset class, but I just this time need to know how to do it properly. Yeah. So I went about getting a list together of what I should be researching, and I started with about 20 points of criteria. That has since expanded to 130 points of criteria, making us probably the the most research-dependent company for property investment in Australia, if not the world. Like, we're very, very research.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much how Cala Property was born, because as I started doing well, my friends and family wanted me to invest with, help them invest as well. And then, due to a variety of life circumstances, I just went, I should just do this as a business.
Lovely.
And along the way, I did financial planning studies. I did my MBA in finance at MGSM.
Yep.
As I said, I've got a degree in international relations, which was very research heavy. I wrote my thesis on Australian aid agencies and ethics.
Right.
And I also practiced as a mortgage broker for about a year.
Yep.
So I've got all of the credentials as well that back it up and make it really a very nuanced research methodology, because I understand so many disparate parts and are able to bring them together in a recommendation for our clients.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. It's an impressive track record.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Worn plenty of hats. Susan, one of the big things that we want to talk about today is probably one of those hotly contested topics in investing property, whether to buy new or to buy established.
Sure.
So your methodology is that you will only buy brand new, which can be polarizing. I mean, as property investors, they're torn in so many different directions. If you look at the different asset classes, you go commercial, you can go residential, you can go Airbnbs, you can go holiday letting, you can go uni accommodation, granny flats, subdivision opportunities. Your head can be spinning as an investor going, which way do I go? So to go new versus old. Talk us through, I guess, your preference, talk us through your approach as well, and I guess your results for your clients would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot in that question, but basically just what we offer is something very, very narrow and very, very deep. Our clients don't really come to us saying we want to buy a property or we want to buy a house and land in Geelong, for example. They say, I've got $500,000 to invest. Where will I get the best return? Okay. The research methodology that I've developed is Australia-wide. Okay. So we're looking at the 550 property markets around Australia all the time.
Yeah.
Now, why new versus old? The 99% of my clients are pure investors. They're busy Sydney professionals, generally speaking. I have a few interstate and international clients, but generally they're busy Sydney professionals who just want the right property in the right place at the right time, and they want to set and forget. Now, most of my clients come to me for a couple of key reasons. Security in retirement is usually the main one, but tax minimization is another. Okay. And because depreciation is now largely only calculable on new property for the fixtures and fittings, that makes a massive difference to their tax return. So new property is where we focus because the majority of our investors are pure investors. The other reason for it is that one of the properties that I had when I was 26 was a property in Blackheath in the Blue Mountains, and it was a beautiful, charming little house that I thought was super good quality because it was hardwood and it had terracotta roof tiles. Yeah. I got the pest report, the building inspection report, and about 30 days after I settled, my insurance company told me they wouldn't insure it because the wiring was too old. Now, think about this, right? This time I was 24 years old. I bought this property for $325,000 and it was going to cost me $12,000 to rewire it. Show me a 23-year-old that doesn't have any family money or family support, self-made, who has $12,000 lying at the back of the couch, So luckily they were the days of good old-fashioned bank managers, and I had a fantastic bank manager from Westpac in Katoomba who just believed in me, and he just said, look, we'll get you the money. So I finally got that done, got it insured, got tenants in, and literally 2 weeks after the tenants moved in, the hot water system blew up. And that cost $1,200. So for me to then go back to the bank manager and go, oh, my God, I'm so sorry. I was just like, what else is going to happen? Now, being in that situation, if I couldn't have found a solution, what do? No one's going to buy that property from me because they now know no one's going to rent it. It's not insured. Like, that's a terrible situation to be in. And I guess, Aaron, being at the coal face of property, I've heard so many of these stories, especially when it relates to pest and building, things that should have been picked up that haven't been. And if you look at those reports, they're a little bit of report and a lot of disclaimer. And that's really concerning, when you're buying like one of the biggest assets you'll ever invest in. I don't really feel like the standard is of a high enough quality for me to be able to recommend to my clients and then for me to be able to sleep well at night. So that's my main reason is for due diligence. So I can do really good due diligence on new property and new builds. I can't on second hand, and the tax minimisation advantage.
Lovely. Thanks very much. And that's what we say to most of our clients. What works for one investor may not be the right strategy for another investor. Different reasons that people invest. There's no right or wrong, but you tend to find, especially with the good buyers agents, the good property advisors, for example, will understand that every investor's journey is unique to them. So it's going to work for someone else isn't going to be the right strategy perhaps for yourself as well.
Yeah, and I think especially given that our research is Australia-wide, if you're recommending a property that's away from where the person lives, they don't even have the option to go and fix it, and do stuff on the weekends. When it's your own property, buying a second-hand property, fine. You're happy to replace the gutters and go to Bunnings on Sunday and get your sausage sizzle on the way. Happy days, right? But when you're an investor, that's just a headache and it's expensive and it erodes your cash flow. And we're always looking at the sweet spot between capital growth and cash flow.
Yeah. You must see plenty of developments that come across your desk, across your business. So talk us through what are you looking for? Yeah. So maybe some of those, not the 430-point checklist, but what are your deal breakers as well? So what are your key metrics, and then what are the no-go areas?
Okay, so the property is actually the last part of our research. So we start with the macro research, and the macro research, broadly speaking, is the economy, employment, population, demographics, supply and demand, infrastructure. And we've got a lot of subcategories within that. But basically, when that part of the research is satisfied, it reveals the capital city or the region that's set for strong capital growth. So that's the capital growth part of the equation. Then we drill down into those regions or capital cities to find by doing the micro research, which is about amenity. Who's going to live there? Who's your tenant going to be? Because your tenant is the person who's going to pay for your rental property. For your investment property through the rental. So, for example, if you're investing in Surrey Hills compared to Pennant Hills, most Sydney siders will get an idea that one is very inner city, hip, young professional. The other one is family. So, you're not going to invest in a studio apartment in a family area, mostly. Like there's sometimes where you would zig instead of zag, but for the most part, you wouldn't do that. So that's where the nuanced kind of research comes into play. And then once we've got the suburb, then we drill down into who's building in the area and do our due diligence on builder. So what we go for, our preference is for house and land, and our preference is for infill house and land in established areas. So think of, a street where they've knocked down an old house and they've built two, like we've done a splitter block and then we secure both of those properties for investors. We love those. It's easy to work out the valuation. We could already see what's around there. It's established, generally speaking. House and land in developing areas, new areas, especially areas that are changing from an old economy to a new economy. So the old economy could be manufacturing or mining, and the new economy invariably is health and education and technology. So those, they're really great areas. So the Sunshine Coast and Geelong have been fantastic examples of that. So new estates in those areas are generally fine, but we tend to understand the difference between the new estates. What we're looking for our investors, like I said, we want set and forget properties, properties that are good quality builds in good quality areas. So a lot of investors have gone into, like if you look at Brisbane recently, the last 5 years has been a big, a lot of focus on in Brisbane. We won't really do anything south of Brisbane, like towards Logan and the Gold Coast. Logan has big issues with crime, with social housing. It hasn't been particularly well developed and planned in terms of dual occupancy properties. There are a lot of dual occs, but not enough parking. So all of these tiny little streets are jam packed with cars, and they're all on the verges, and it just makes it really ugly. By contrast, if you look at the northern growth corridor of Brisbane, that's been enormously successful. The Moreton Bay region is getting, Sunshine Coast University in Petrie. It's one of the fastest growing regions in Australia. In fact, I think it's the fastest growing region in Queensland. And all the way up to the Sunshine Coast has been a great investment for our clients. The Gold Coast tends to oversupply really quickly because they don't have the same height restrictions as the rest of Australia seems to have.
Well, and the beach has a shadow by
that's so true, yeah. But also, it's a great place to visit. I love the Gold Coast, but my parents live there and I love visiting, but I would never invest there for that reason. Yeah. The other thing too is that from Broadbeach across to the M1, the road infrastructure to get onto the M1 is appalling. So if you need to travel to Brisbane or further south, you're in for an hour's drive just to get onto the highway. Yeah. So if you look at Google Maps, it's 40 minutes to Brisbane. It's never 40 minutes to Brisbane.
Local.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're kind of my main things that I would look for. Also, we know what valuers value, what they prefer in terms of floor plans. So we look for specific floor plans. We also insist when it's a new house and land build, we can insist on a certain level of inclusions such as high ceilings, stone bench tops, floor to ceiling cabinetry in the kitchens, floor to ceiling tiling in the bathrooms. Yeah. We have like a colour inclusions pack or an upgrade pack that we insist upon. But when it comes to, say, townhouse developments and apartments, which we don't do a lot of, but obviously we need to do those for SMSF because they're single contract, we look at upper floors, corners, away from common areas, away from the garage, and north or east facing, depending on the state.
Great. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Super thorough. I'm going to go here. It may open a can of worms, Susan, but you've been fairly outspoken that the rise of the female investor, and I think it's backed up by a lot of market intelligence. So it's certainly not an opinion. We've seen it. The research shows it that females are outperforming males when it comes to property ownership. Yeah. I think there's probably two key demographics. One is younger women, graduated, good incomes. Now maybe it's not the same level playing field in terms of income parity with their male counterparts. So that's one part. And the next age group is perhaps women later in life who may be separated, realize that they haven't got enough for super, for example, they've got a family home, but they don't have the asset base to retire comfortably as well, which is why they're looking at investing in property to have a comfortable retirement. So talk us through, you've obviously dealt with a number of female investors. Yeah. Why do they make better investors, and what can males do perhaps to start maybe catching up there a little bit as well?
Yeah, so firstly, I don't really have opinions in this space. Everything I do is research driven. Yep. And actually, I was asked this question a couple of years ago and asked to write something about it, and that went viral. So that's kind of part of the reason why.
Now,
yeah, exactly. So, and recently I was asked again by the project and 3AW, I think it was, because the ABS statistic came out about women getting into the market before their male counterparts when they were younger. So I think you're right to address those two different demographics. So just on that, I think that younger women are much savvier. They're aware of property as a good vehicle for investment. And I think older women realise that, they have been much more harshly, dealt with. Well, mostly I think,
workforce, for example. Yeah.
So the average Australian woman would have to work 12 years longer than her average male counterpart to have the same balance in superannuation in retirement. So I think that's part of it, is we're just so much more aware of these statistics now, and we know how to interpret them, and there's a voice for it, right? Yeah. There are women like me in this marketplace rather than just being men like you in this marketplace who are talking about things that are relevant to men. Right. And I guess I've seen this firsthand. I've seen it in my own family. I've seen it amongst friends. But what makes women better investors? The research shows that they're more likely to talk amongst themselves. Yep. Women do.
Powerful people.
Yeah. So women are more likely to seek help rather than talk about the results. So men are more likely to go, I've got 3 investment properties, rather than, I've got no idea what I'm doing. How do I get into this and who do I speak to? Yeah. Have you got someone I can recommend? Men are much more likely to go it alone, and they're also much more likely to have been taught by their fathers. And the way to invest now is not necessarily the way we should have been investing when our fathers were investing. So men were more likely to get that financial and property education than their daughters were. Sons were more than daughters.
Yeah.
So I think women tend to talk amongst themselves more. They tend to collaborate more. They also do a lot more preliminary research, so they know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Men are much more likely to take a punt and just go, let's give this a crack.
Yep.
Whereas women are much more risk averse generally, especially with something like that.
Yep.
And also women are more likely to take advice. Women are more likely to seek out the advice of people who should know more rather than the opinion at the barbecue from Uncle John who goes, mate, I reckon that's a bad place to invest. And and I see this all the time. So I think they're kind of the 5 main takeaways from that. But I think for women too, there is, with property, it's the timing is critical for the first cycle. But after the first cycle, it's really compound interest that's doing the heavy lifting. So given Australian property in a capital city will double in value on average every 11 years, and in a regional area every 15. Women who are even at the age of 50 who have, been screwed over by, divorce or children or deaths in the family or having to look after, children as well as aging parents or less education or whatever it is, can still get into the market at the age of 50 and have enough in retirement. And that's really exciting.
Susan, thank you very much for being so sharing with your insights and your years of industry knowledge. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, like I mentioned, Susan's details will be in the show notes as well. If you've found this episode helpful, feel free to leave us a review, share it with your friends and family as well. Thank you very much, Susan. Thanks for listening to us as well. And until next time, have a good one.